Welcome to the Tuesday, March 12, 2024 regular closed session meeting of the EBMUD Board of Directors. We are moving to roll call, and President Lisa McIntosh is absent.
Just one moment. Okay. Director Chan,
Present.
Director Katz,
Present.
Director Lenny,
Here?
Director Young,
Here.
Vice President Patterson.
Present. And Director Lisa McIntosh is excused. If members of the public, do we have any members of the public online?
No public comment online.
Okay. Then, when prompted for speakers, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Please refrain from providing personal information such as addresses or phone numbers during the public comment. If we need this information, we will have you contact our staff. The secretary will call each speaker in order received. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak. However, I have discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. Secretary will track time and inform each speaker when the allotted time has concluded.
You have the two speakers in the room. You have Yvette Rivera and Eric Larson.
Eric?
Your 3 minutes start now, Eric.
Thank you, Risha. Good morning, Director Patterson,
Yes,
board
Eric.
members, and general manager. My name is Eric Larson. I'm the president of AFSCME Local 444. I want to talk to you this morning about a PERB charge that we filed. But first, I'm going to read to you from the Water Distribution Crew Foreman Job Classification. Duty Statement Number 9. Minimizes public and employee safety hazards by assuring that traffic channeling devices, warning devices, and barricades are effectively placed and conformed to required codes. Prepares necessary traffic plans for supervisor review as needed. Ensures employees are trained to use safe working methods in conformance with Cal OSHA regulations and applicable regulatory standards. Initiates and ensures the marking of underground facility work is completed and enforces regulatory compliance and field management practices and extends appropriate notifications. So when the foreman is alerting to the assistant construction and maintenance superintendent and the superintendent of his yard that this isn't done, and they're telling him, don't slow the contractor down, lower the pots and they'll raise them. But don't slow the contractor down. And there's a complete lack of planning has resulted in a lack of traffic safety control, a lack of fire safety control, and a lack of marking underground utilities, and it's 95 degrees outside, and that's your job, and you're being dismissed in the interest of production, you might get a little frustrated. And when your superintendent shows up on the job site with his 2 assistants and sends your crew home and speaks to you in a condescending and belittling manner, continuing to dismiss your safety concerns, you might get a little hot. You might get a little frustrated. You might even get in an argument. But when the district removes you from the workplace on trumped up charges for 8 months without a security investigation, that is disrespect. When the district fails to recognize your 22 years of service with meets, exceeds, or exceptional performance and issues a notice of intent to terminate, that is disrespect. And when the superintendent and manager of operation and maintenance fail to hear your safety concerns and the concern for the safety of your crew and the community where you're working, that is disrespect. And we're going to file a PERB charge. And the district preaches safety, but when we're advocating for safety and being disregarded in the interest of production, that is disrespect. And we're going to fight uncompromisingly and defend our members' right to advocate for safety and even stop work for safety, because we want everyone to go home at the end of the day. So you may see our PERB charge in closed session today. I'm not really sure at what point it comes across your desk, but I'm sure you'll give it careful consideration and thoughtful direction when it comes. It is hypocrisy of the district to allege disrespect, and we will not accept any level of suspension for our member on allegation of disrespect when they were advocating for safety. This should have been concluded in August of last year. It should have been administratively shut down in January, but if we're gonna have to take it all 12 rounds, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
I just have I have a question.
Oh, you have a question?
I'm somewhat familiar with this. The question is, what's your resolution? What do you want to have happen to address what occurred?
We want the employee fully reinstated and made whole without any loss of pay, without any disciplinary action towards that member. And we want the Employee Relations Department, who oversaw at least part of the investigation, to understand the employee's rights under the MMBA, as well as the superintendent's duties to adhere to the MMBA in terms of when an employee is raising concerns about safety, in terms of lack of planning, in terms of lack of sufficient traffic controls, in terms of lack of planning for fire hazards or underground utility marking, that those superintendents are placing those safety concerns above the concern of production and possibly slowing the contractor down.
Thank you.
Any other
Eric,
questions?
you just provided some facts that I had not heard before that indicate mitigating factors in any type of situation like this. I just want to make sure that you're referring to the same matter that you've brought before us in the last month or so. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You have any? So no other questions, then we have a second speaker, Yvette Rivera.
Your 3 minutes start now.
Thank you. I'm surprised the union is just going to file an MBA complaint or a PERB complaint when it sounds like it's a whistleblower complaint that can be litigated. But hopefully it gets resolved before it even gets elevated to that. I came to 2 meetings this morning. I went to the planning meeting because I enjoy going there to say, you better get the plan and paying the $8 million plus interest, which is about $1,200 a day since last June, I think. But now, and I gave the document at this meeting to Director Katz and Director Linney because everybody else has already received it. I read from the document, but I'm going to summarize that so far, $8 million. Then this motion that just came in during Black History Month says that the attorneys want attorney fees and expenses of $4.5 million. Now, these attorneys provided their resumes and their work history in this motion as declarations, and they're the best of the best in the United States. So I can't even imagine how the district is going to win reducing those attorney fees and expenses, but I'm looking forward to watching it happen. So now you've got the $12.5 million that's on the table. We're not even counting how much the district is going to spend on the Ninth Circuit appellate litigation, or how much the district paid for the 4 separate investigations that this paper mentions, and the litigation costs since the beginning of the litigation. I'm going to end by reading the last paragraph that I highlighted, and I think it's relevant to what President of ASME, Eric Larson, brought up. In this memo, it says, from the outset, this was a challenging case that faced many legal and factual obstacles. Plaintiffs were employed as attorneys in the East Bay Mud Legal Department, and in response to plaintiffs' complaints of discrimination and retaliation, defendant East Bay Mud initiated 4 separate and lengthy internal investigations with third-party investigators, also all lawyers, each of whom found no wrongdoing by defendants. Thus, plaintiffs were forced to prove their case almost exclusively through circumstantial evidence, through the testimony of adverse defense witnesses, many of whom were lawyers or workplace experts retained by EBMUD, who had already made multiple purportedly independent findings in favor of EBMUD. I'm going to go ahead and speak at the next meeting. I really hope that this board gets a chance to look at this motion and considers whether or not, well, not considers, I'm looking forward to the Ninth Circuit proceeding, and that should be happening before the end of the year. Thank you, I yield.
Thank you. If there are no more speakers, then we'll proceed with the closed session. The board will now convene to conference room 8 for the closed session and is scheduled to return for the regular meeting at 1:15 p.m. Welcome to the Tuesday, March 12, 2024 regular business meeting of the East Bay Municipal Utility District Board of Directors. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
We're not ready just yet for the Pledge of Allegiance. If you want to go ahead and announce the committees, so there's a document right there. So we're going to go ahead and announce the committees and roll call, then we do the pledge.
Oh. We will receive reports from this morning's Planning and Legislative Human Resources Committee meetings under item 12. You want a roll call?
Yeah, President McIntosh is absent, and I will call roll. Director Chan,
Present.
Director Katz. Present. Director Lenny.
Here.
Director Young,
Here.
Vice President Patterson.
Present. I'm hooked in my chair. I got unhooked.
All right.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I kind of seen it all. I got hooked by the chair. It's really something.
Director Young will now recognize Women's History Month and the new affinity group, We Rock.
Okay. Well, it's a long time coming, I think. The district has its newest affinity group, the Women's Employee Resource Opportunity and Collaboration Community, otherwise known, if you've been wondering what the gold balloons are at the top of the second floor stairway, it's We Rock. Where are they? In honor of Women's History Month, which is in March, and Women's History Day, which is the 15th, I believe, a couple of days from now. We Rock is spotlighting various women at the district for their unique and substantial contributions. I think their pictures are below the balloons on the second floor. Somebody nod and tell me I'm right about that. Thank you. Because I didn't get the chance to go over and look at them closely this morning. The group is also hosting 2 events aimed at broadening awareness and support for the role of women in construction, utility service, and who are employed at the district. We, the Board of Directors, support We Rock and Women's History Month. So thank you. I look forward to connecting with the group, and way to go. There's no anything. Okay. I don't get to do a plaque or a picture. I don't, oh well. All right, next
Thank you.
next up.
Thank you, Director Young. Now, this is announcement from closed session. The board met in closed session this morning to consider a request by the General Counsel to authorize initiation of litigation in one matter. All directors were present in closed session with the exception of President McIntosh, who is excused, and a director for the vacant seat for Ward 2. All directors present voted to authorize the General Counsel to initiate litigation in the matter. The action, defendants, and other particulars will be disclosed upon inquiry once the action is formally commenced. There are no further announcements from closed session.
We're now on to public comment.
Public comment. Do we have anybody online?
There are no online comments. We have one hand for public comment online at the moment.
If members of the public online wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard now.
I'm going to check and see if this is on a non-agenda item. George Cleveland?
It is a non-agenda item. It's just straight public comment. Thank you, Risha.
Okay, so we're ready for the public comment. Vice President Patterson, I'll go
Yes.
ahead and start the 3 minutes. George,
Yes.
your 3 minutes will start now.
Thank you, Risha. Good afternoon, everyone. While I'm now retired, I've maintained a relationship with ASME Local 2019. As part of the relationship, I was sent info about the district contact center. The info was posted on February 27, 2024 to Glassdoor, a LinkedIn-style website, by an anonymous customer service representative. The post is titled, "Nepotism and Favoritism in Contact Center Leads to Toxic Workplace." It reads as follows. New management took over a few years ago. The manager, to be referred to as M, has recently hired her own daughter and a close personal friend to both work in the department. The daughter, to be referred to as D, is a customer service representative, and the friend, to be referred to as F, is a supervisor. Under M, a tenured employee, to be referred to as E, was quickly promoted from customer service representative to senior customer services representative and finally to supervisor. E has been known to be a very abrasive and overbearing personality and was likely passed for promotions by prior management since they likely knew she would become a tyrant if given any authority. Unfortunately, that is what has happened. E can be very aggressive and is very opinionated and will pursue anyone she does not personally like. E has appeared to make it her mission to go after certain individuals and find very petty reasons to try and apply disciplinary action. At the same time, E and F are sure to look the other way when D blatantly disregards the norms and rules of the contact center. Regarding D and the work rules, she is often seen applying makeup, making personal calls, and viewing social media sites, all while at her desk and on company time. D is regularly late, also regularly takes very extended breaks, and clearly is not held to the same standards as the rest of the staff. This has caused a big morale drop as it is extremely brazen and blatant. E and F are very rude and condescending to most staff. E and F spend lots of time behind closed doors in each other's offices and are rarely available. Supervisors and the managers regularly go off-site for several hours for lunch. Management has such a lack of accountability, though they scrutinize every minute of every employee's time, except D, who is permitted to do whatever she feels and without consequence. The toxic environment is taking a toll on everyone's mental and emotional well-being, with stress, anxiety, and resentment becoming commonplace among the workforce. Staff is extremely unsettled about the whole matter, and morale is at an all-time low, though many fear retaliation, so it is a hard situation. Many contact center employees have left and are continuing to leave. Now, that's the end of the post. Now, just before my retirement last year, a CSR approached me to advise of the same issues, so this is an ongoing chronic problem. When the board refers this problem to staff to investigate, it would be beneficial if the staff person or persons don't have family members who work for the district. Let's hope the problem can be quickly resolved. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Okay.
The matter will be looked into. When prompted, these are for speaker. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Please refrain from providing personal information such as addresses or phone during the public hearing. If we need this information, we will have you contact staff. The secretary will call each speaker in the order received. Each speaker will be allotted 3 minutes to speak. However, I have discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. Secretary will track time and informs each speaker when the allotted time is concluded.
You have one
Just
speaker
one
in the
comment.
audience, yes, you have the one speaker here for public comment, Yvette?
Yes, Yvette Rivera.
And your 3 minutes will start now.
Thank you. I provided all members the Saji Pierce and Ariel Bland update and the document called Plaintiff's Notice of Motion and Motion for Statutory Attorney Fees and Expenses. In this afternoon's meeting, I provided you a document that I emailed you, but I had printed locally, and it's the Ninth Circuit proceedings in my case. I paid to have a transcriber memorialize this. It's really a wonderful gift for me because, again, litigation is the only place where our truth can come out, because we already know what the district's truth can end up being. And in the case of the Saji Pierce and Ariel Bland case, this document that I provided the district in February, at the end of February, it was during Black History Month, was really just, it's a wonderful document for those of us who've experienced what these two women, what a jury now says warranted $8 million. I'm going to read just a paragraph that I think is relevant to what employees of the district are subjected to in terms of retaliation and investigations that are biased. And let me just end by telling you that it's $4.5 million that the attorneys want to get for their attorney fees and expenses, and that coupled with the $8 million from the jury. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more money with the appellate court proceedings. And the best paragraph that I've read to you today is the one that talks about the lengthy internal investigations. Defendant EBMUD initiated 4 separate and lengthy internal investigations with third-party investigators, also all lawyers, each of whom found no wrongdoing by defendants. Thus, plaintiffs were forced to prove their case almost exclusively through circumstantial evidence, through testimony of adverse defense witnesses, many of whom were lawyers or workplace experts retained by EBMUD who already made multiple purportedly independent findings in favor of EBMUD. I know that today is a day where General Manager Chan can talk about an award that the district is getting, because I think that these awards, and I've mentioned it before, they're great pacifiers, and they manage to lull the board of directors into a sense of complacency sometimes. I know that, I'm going to be posting to YouTube every time a director is frustrated with my message. Thank goodness for social media. But I hope that this document gives you a pause to really consider whether or not these investigations that are supposed to be unbiased are truly unbiased, because a jury found that they weren't. Thank you, I yield.
Thank you, Yvette.
We're now moving on
Move
to
on
the
to
consent calendar.
Director Ryerson? We're moving on to consent calendar.
We're on the consent calendar. We have no other public comment.
Okay, we'll close the calendar then. Yes, next is a consent calendar, items 1 through 6.
I'll move adoption of the consent calendar.
I'd like to pull item number 4.
Item what?
4.
Item 4. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
I'm happy to just have it be 1, 2, and 3 that we're moving to adopt.
And 5 and 6, right?
And 5 and 6, sorry.
1, 2, 3, and 5, yeah. 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Make a second to that.
And a second. Moved and properly second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? That's so ordered. Now we will hear item 4.
Okay. I just had some questions about item number 4. I was wondering what the timeline is on this?
Casey, can you provide that information?
Good afternoon, Board of Directors. So today before you is a contract for the CEQA M&D for the Miller Road operations. And the,
Speak up a little bit or get closer to the mic.
so this contract has about a 10-month period for, for the board to adopt CEQA M&D for this project. And there'll be multiple board motions required before we get to that point. So we have multiple opportunities for you to have input on the project along the way, and including some public meetings that'll be required as part of the project.
Okay, but this particular item is just for the negative declaration? Negative mitigation declaration, that's it?
Yes, it is, yeah. It's just the
Okay.
consultant agreement for the M&D.
And then, so what's the timetable? I mean, when does this company start? When does this end?
March 26th is our target for giving them to the notice to proceed, and then in January of next year, we would be coming to you to adopt the M&D.
Okay, and then, are you still thinking that that we would run this project during the summer months?
So we won't be doing any work
Not
at
this,
the
not for
Miller Road site.
2024, right? So 2024, there's no work, but
No work.
2025?
Nope.
I guess you're ramping up for 2025, that's it.
So yeah, if the county grants the district a conditional use permit to operate the Miller Road site, then yes, we would like to remove soil in 2025.
Okay, so what are the authoritative bodies that are relevant here?
The county has said that the deciding body, in this case, would be the Planning Commission at
It
Alameda
goes to the
County.
Planning Commission?
Yeah, well, we would also present to the Castro Valley MAC first,
So MAC and then Planning Commission.
and then the Planning Commission, yes, where we would have a hearing to have the conditional use permit application decided at that body.
And then do you have any appeal options after the Planning Commission to the Board of, directly to the Board of Supervisors?
That's correct.
Okay, so just something small. So you're aware that the road is not usable right now, right? Miller, okay. So Redwood Road was damaged in the storms last year. So we have not had access to that road for over a year, those of us in the community. So it is not usable. There's actually a barrier right now that stops people from using that road. So are you aware?
Yeah, I'm aware. There's a movable barrier that's before, like right after the golf course there, And then there's a permanent barrier where no one can drive beyond that. But the district does have access to its Miller Road site with the movable barrier. We're able to use the site.
So, have you been communicating with Public Works about like what is the timeline for getting that road fixed?
Well, we still have access to our site, so the
Why-
closure of Miller Road beyond, the closure of Redwood Road beyond Miller Road is.
So, but there's a barrier. I know it's a movable barrier, but when I'm sort of thinking nobody's supposed to move that barrier to use the road. That barrier is to actually stop traffic. But what you're saying is that you move the barrier and you use the road.
Yeah, because later on, there is what's called K-rail, concrete K-rail that blocks anyone from using, well, the pedestrians and the cyclists seem to like using Redwood Road beyond the closed area. But that's further down the road than our Miller Road site.
Right, I know. So it's at the bend that, there's the site, and then there's a bend, and at the bend is completely closed off. But I'm just kind of curious, do we have permission to be using that road that's blocked off? And, because there is a barrier there.
Yeah, so our property, we have to access our property. It's USL watershed property. And so the cones that are there with just some caution tape are able to, I mean, we move that and access our watershed property. So if you like, we can speak with Alameda County about that, but the permanent closure on Redwood Road does not impact the district's use of its site.
Yeah, I know. It's
but-
beyond the site.
Beyond the site.
Yeah, I know that.
And besides, using the site for the maintenance activities, I mean, that's the only access to our dam. So we have to be able to go down there to access the dam, any of the appurtenances. So we can still go through to access our facility and the dam, because we would go down Redwood Road to the Mill Road site, and then we would go up that road, so.
Okay, but I'm just more wondering about the timeline for getting that road fixed, what Public Works might have been saying about that.
We can ask them. The county probably put this movable barricade where it is so that people could just turn around when they get to that point, because that's where the golf course is, so you can turn around there. But so that people don't go to the end where you can't turn around.
Well, I don't know, I did a ride-along with CHP in that area, and they were absolute that, like, nobody should be there. There were people that were walking down the road, and the officer was upset about that. So I don't know if there's been private communications, but I'm just saying.
We can have that conversation, but again, we need that road we have to be able to access the dam.
Well, I understand, and it's actually on the schedule to be fixed.
We can find out what that schedule is.
Public Works has that on the schedule to be fixed. I was just asking if you knew what the timeline was for that.
I don't know the timeline. We can find out from Alameda County.
Can I just ask a question? I mean, the point of the mitigated negative declaration would be to assess impact. I mean, all of this would be part of, including what would need to be done, on the road and access and the like, I would think, associated with off-hauling, the plans that are in place for this project. So it seems like it would be part of that. This is just to authorize the contract with the firm that will be doing the
Yeah.
environmental documentation, right?
I understand. I just think that, the opposition that's going to come isn't going to be because of the road. It's going to be, like it has been historically, the trucks
How many
driving through
trucks
the
are going there
roads.
every day now?
I don't have that information.
But trucks are going there
We're not
every day
using this.
right now, yeah?
But the whole thing is if Public Works says, hey, we're not going to fix that road for 2 years, then does it make sense for us to actually spend the money right now? I mean, I'm just throwing that out because I've heard lots of different time ranges for when that road can be fixed. And also, it was in pretty bad shape before, because of the storms last year, but this year, there were additional storms that I can imagine damage the road even further. So I hadn't talked to Public Works since, a couple weeks ago when those storms were really bad. But I'm just saying, even fixing the road could be a moving target.
Yeah, and I just want to repeat that the permanent closure of Redwood Road does not impact the district's current use of the site.
But there, I know that there are two closures, but I don't think that we're supposed to be, I don't think that we're supposed to be using that road at all. I mean, why is there, I mean, I think the only reason why maybe there's a movable barrier there is because Public Works doesn't know people are moving the barrier to drive. That's,
I think it's
It's
simple
a
so people can
possibility.
turn around at the golf course so that once they reach that closure. Because there's a place to turn around if they put the barrier there.
that's exactly, I know exactly where the barrier is. I know exactly what the barrier is. I'm just saying, I think, well, when I rode with the CHP, I'm just not gonna, I'll just say this one more time because I'm becoming repetitive, but when I did a ride along with CHP in that area after the storms last year, they were like most definitive, nobody should be on this road, not even pedestrians should be on this road. So if there's something else, some sort of other agreement, then I'm in the dark about that.
Yeah, I understand your concerns. We'll get back to you regarding the road access, regardless of the MMD work that's going to be ongoing for the continued use of the site. But we'll dig into it, and we'll get back to you on the status with Public Works.
Okay, see if they have an idea at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was that everything? Oh, so, all right. That was all from me. I was just checking to see about the status of the road. Thank you so much. Appreciate your help.
Okay. So on item 4,
I'll move the item.
moved and properly second, item 4. All in favor of the motion indicate by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. We'll move on to determination and discussion.
Yeah, so first we have our legislative update. We have Kathy Viatella here to provide the update. We did present a number of bills at the Legislative Human Resources Committee this morning, and the committee unanimously supported staff's recommendation to support SB 903. So Kathy.
Thank you, General Manager Chan. Good afternoon, sorry. Vice President Patterson and members of the board. So I do have one bill to present for a position, and then I'll walk through an information item where we're not recommending any positions, but those bills deal with connection fees and capacity charges. So the first item before you today for a position is SB 903, and this bill is by Senator Skinner, and it would take a comprehensive approach to PFAS pollution. So the bill would do 4 things essentially. So starting January 1, 2030, it would prohibit the distribution, sale, and offer for sale any products that contain intentionally added PFAS unless the Department of Toxic Substances and Control has determined that PFAS is currently unavoidable in those products. It would allow DTSC, which is the acronym for the department, to implement a ban earlier than 2030 if it was determined to be feasible to do so. It would establish a process for manufacturers of consumer products that contain PFAS to petition DTSC to make a determination that the PFAS in the product is currently unavoidable, and it lays out a process for how to make that determination. And then it requires the department, DTSC, to adopt regulations to implement the bill's provisions before January 1, 2027. So the bill also contains an enforcement provision, and it would impose a civil penalty not to exceed $1,000 per day for the first violation of the PFAS ban, and then $2,500 per day for a second violation. And any of the penalties that are collected would be deposited into a PFAS penalty account, and they'd be available upon appropriation by the legislature, and those funds could be used for administration and enforcement of the bill's provision. So we talked this morning in the committee about sort of our history in supporting PFAS pollution prevention bills, or bills that ban PFAS in consumer products. We have had a long history of supporting those. There are now currently bans of PFAS in cosmetics and textiles and in food packaging. We had supported a bill in 2022 that was sort of trying to take the first step towards a comprehensive approach that would have required manufacturers of products that contain PFAS or companies that manufactured PFAS compounds to report that information on a publicly accessible database. That bill was vetoed by the governor in 2022. And then last year, we supported some additional bills that dealt with banning PFAS in cleaning products and also in artificial turf. But as you may recall, the governor vetoed those bills, and that was because in his message, he stated it was becoming difficult to enforce, single product bans. Each of them had different thresholds and different provisions. So he had directed the legislature, or the Department of Toxic Substances Control, to work with the legislature on an alternative approach. And SB 903 is the legislature's response to the governor's veto from last year. So the bill is sponsored by the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, of which we are a member, the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners, Clean Water Action, Environmental Working Group, and NRDC. And we don't yet have a list of supporters or opposition. That will be coming out once we see the committee analysis. So as the committee this morning, the Leg HR Committee supported our staff recommendation to support the bill. So that's the decision before you.
And I'm not the chair. Bill's the chair of that committee, sorry.
Anything?
I move adoption of the bill. I mean, this has national potential if it manages to pass, to do basically, because nobody's going to make one product for California and not make it for the, do the same thing for the rest of the country. So we got to support it.
I second taking a support position on the bill.
All right. Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered.
All
Okay. Is there further
Yes,
information?
well, thank you for the support position, and we will convey that to the legislature before the committee hearing. There is now an information item on capacity charges and connection fees. So as part of the legislature's broader interest in housing supply and affordability, there have been several bills introduced this year that focuses on development fees, or otherwise known as mitigation impact fees. And our system capacity charges and connection fees fall under what is called the Mitigation Fee Act, which is in statute. But they are treated separately from other developer mitigation fees. And just kind of as some background, what are capacity charges and connection fees for water and for wastewater? They are basically considered fee for services in statute, and therefore they are subject to Prop 26, which is a constitutional provision. And so they may, under that provision, they may not exceed the estimated reasonable cost of providing the service for which the fee is being charged. So the district collects these system capacity charges and connection fees, and we use it to recover the capital cost of providing water. And it's based on this idea, this principle that growth, really needs to pay for new growth. So that's just to give you a background on that. So the four measures that have been introduced, and there are other spot bills, some of which are being amended, so we could see more bills coming forward. But the four today that I wanted to present to you as information items, not recommending a position at this time because we believe it's still early in the process. But the first one is AB 1820. This is by Assemblymember Shivo, and it's co-authored by Assemblymember Grayson. So Mr. Grayson is from our delegation. This bill would allow developers that submit a preliminary application for a project to request a good faith estimate of the fee and exaction statement from their local agency. It would require the local agency, and that includes EBMUD, because local agencies is defined to include special districts, to provide a fee estimate within 10 business days of the submission of that preliminary application. And when the local agency determines that a project is complete, it is required then to provide the developer or the project proponent with an itemized list of all the fees and charges within 10 days. One of the challenges with this particular bill is that there's no requirement for local cities or counties that receive a preliminary application to inform or consult with special districts. That is not a common practice today, and it is not required in the bill. So we wouldn't have knowledge of when they'd actually submitted a preliminary application, and the clock starts ticking to meet the 10-day requirement. Also, preliminary housing applications or project applications often don't include the kinds of information that is necessary for us to provide an accurate assessment of what those fees may be. So this bill is sponsored by the San Francisco Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association, which is commonly known as the acronym SPUR, and then also the California Building Industry Association, CBIA. The second bill for consideration or in your packet is AB 2729, and this one's by Assemblymember Joe Patterson. He is a Republican from Rockland, and his bill is prohibiting a local government agency from requiring a payment of mitigation or development fees, which could possibly include water, wastewater connection fees and capacity charges until the first dwelling unit receives its final inspection or certificate of occupancy, whichever comes first. The bill would apply to special districts, but there's no specific reference to water and wastewater connection fees and capacity charges. So that being said, the bill still could be construed to include them currently. And this bill is sponsored by the author. And then the third bill, SB 937 by Senator Wiener and co-authored with Assemblymember Grayson. It has provisions similar to AB 2729, Mr. Patterson's bill. This bill would allow a developer to delay the payment of mitigation or development fees, including water and wastewater connection fees and capacity charges, until the first dwelling unit receives its certificate of occupancy. And additionally, a local government agency could not charge interest on any deferred fees. It has a separate provision for multifamily residents, so the fees could be paid on a pro rata basis based on a percentage of those units which had received their certificate of occupancy, or when all have received the certificate of occupancy. And SB 937 places restrictions on fees that can be charged to lower income residents. It changes some of the existing provisions in the code. So both of these bills, AB 2729 by Assemblymember Patterson and SB 937 by Senator Wiener, is the problem with them, or the challenge with them, is water and wastewater agencies could end up performing the work, be at risk of not actually being paid in a timely manner, and with no way to guarantee payment once a building is occupied or if there is a delay in the project. And this bill is currently sponsored by the California Housing Consortium and the Housing Action Coalition. And these are coalition groups that include developers as well as sort of low-income housing advocate groups. And then the last bill, SB 1210 by Senator Skinner. This bill would impose a 1% cap on connection fees and capacity charges for electrical, gas, sewer, and or wastewater service based on the developer's reported permit value. So each utility would be subject to the 1% cap. And the cap applies to public utilities, which, as defined in the bill, includes investor-owned utilities, and also to special districts. It requires a public utility or special district to collect fees over a period of at least 10 years, so it could be longer 10 years, beginning on the date of occupancy. And if a house is sold or the unit is sold during that period of amortization, then any subsequent owner would have to pay the fee for the remainder of the payment period. So that would require some kind of encumbrance on the property to be able to collect that fee. It requires a public utility or a special district to prioritize electrical, gas, sewer, or water services connections to housing projects over all other types of projects, including commercial projects. And it requires the public utility or the special district to report on its website the amount of the connection fees and capacity charges. So one of the real challenges with SB 10 is the bill currently, as I had mentioned before, it would be shifting the costs of the capital costs because of the 1% cap on new construction onto the existing ratepayer base if we were to continue to recover those costs. And that has an equity aspect to it, right? It's an inequitable approach, and in violation essentially of Prop 26. It could require EBMUD to provide separate water meters to multifamily units in order for the bill, to collect and to bill the individual units and collect fees over that payback period, however long that may be. And the implementation of this policy overall, could create conflict with state constitutional provisions. I mentioned Prop 26, but you also get into Prop 218 issues. If we make a decision to shift those costs onto existing ratepayers, you get into a gray area of whether you're actually in violation of Prop 218. And in addition, if you're extending the payback period over a period of 10 years, it's almost as if you're paying a continuous cost of service. And so you could get again into the realm of Prop 218 and potentially be in violation. There's no case law on this because this would be new, but those are some of the concerns that we have. So we have met with all of the authors' offices on all 4 of these bills to really better understand their intent and share what our system capacity charges and connection fees are, and what they cover, and how we are subject to these constitutional restrictions. We've also shared with them that we looked at our system capacity charges in a study in 2020, and we made revisions to them based on new information in 2021, which brought the cost of them actually down by a total of 30%. So all 4 offices have noted, their bills are really trying to encourage more housing development, and their goal and desire is to provide developers with greater transparency and predictability when it comes to what they call soft costs, like the mitigation impact fees. As I said at the beginning, it's really still early in the process, and so there are likely to be amendments to these bills as they go through policy committee, and others weigh in, including our sharing our perspective. The associations are weighing in, the water associations as well as the Special Districts Association. We will continue to monitor these bills, and as they are amended in the future, and any new bills that may be amended that deal with the same topic, and bring these relevant measures back to the board to keep you updated and make a determination whether we need to take a position or we just continue to work with the offices to address our concerns. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions?
What would you say are the goals or the focuses for the legislators, and they may be different depending on the legislator and the bill. I think we've heard recently, in the last several months or so, of an interest around ADUs. These bills look more broadly, it appears, to all residential development. So it would be often, it's apparent on the face of the bills that they don't yet incorporate the complexities that you've discussed. But what else would you comment in terms of the core interest or the primary goal of the legislation?
So I think the primary objective of these bills right now is to address affordable housing and to provide greater transparency for developers on what these fees are and what they should expect. Because when they go to secure their financing and they're dealing with their underwriting, they need to know, they're asking for greater clarity. That is what we have been told. They're asking for greater information on what the fees are. Because of our process and because of the permitting process, there are delays, and we can't give an accurate estimation until we have the information that's in the application when the developers apply to us. They're also focused not just on ADUs. There are separate ADU bills that are coming forward this year. This is focused on all housing. There's also, I think, through our process and speaking with the authors' offices, we've learned that a lot of them aren't aware of the distinction between system capacity charges and connection fees, which are dealt with separately in the Mitigation Fee Act, versus other mitigation fees that are paying for things like parks and things of that nature. So our fees are cost for service. So we're educating them about that, and I think there's some greater understanding and there's some appreciation for our process. So, but I think the overall goal is really affordable housing, transparency, and trying to address some of these soft costs is what they're reporting to us.
These bills look like they go further than affordable housing
Yes.
on the face of the bill. When it comes to affordable housing, I was very excited when the state budget several years ago began to include a program in the HCD, Housing and Community Development Budget, that allows for only in participating cities, which I think could be a barrier probably for lack of information and lack of bureaucratic ability. And that may be something that can be overcome. But basically in that HCD budget, there is a grant program that allows for affordable housing developers to receive a grant to cover the costs of our fees and similar types of charges and fees. So I wonder whether we can look to that as a partial solution, and if we can look at how that program is performing, and if it can be streamlined to be more accessible, and if it can be cast to be more secure and reliable. And maybe that is a way of improving the discussion, because we do want to make sure that affordable housing projects don't have these uncertainties and barriers. And I was very excited to see that program occurring, but I've never seen a report on how it's performing, whether it's being used as intended. And maybe it doesn't have to be designed exactly the way it is now. Maybe it could be improved if there's barriers. So those are some thoughts as we're looking for alternatives to meet the goals of the legislators.
Oh, yeah, well, I put up my hand earlier, but I remember when we talked about this, or we had a workshop on the connection fees, that not all utilities have them. What are some of the other utilities that do, and perhaps are targeted for this, or that we could work with to try and?
A lot of the special districts have them, and so we've been working with CSDA on these. I think if we look around in our service area, SFPUC, Contra Costa, there's several in the Bay Area that have these. And so we can, work with them. We've engaged with the associations, also with Oakland, CMUA, and asked them to weigh in, and they have taken positions on the bills to be opposed unless amended, and some straight oppose. So there is opportunity to work with them.
Okay.
So, and I think the distinction between connection fees and system capacity, system capacity charges really are one of those kind of mitigation basically they're, asking newcomers to pay for the infrastructure, help pay for the infrastructure that serves everyone, and that, people that are already in paid for. So that, they do seem really distinct. But if we combine them, isn't the average that we're talking about is coming out, it's a lot. It comes out to like 25,000 for an ADU that has to put in a meter and a connection or something like that, somewhere around there.
Are you trying to distinguish between the connection fee
Well, I'm
and
just
the
trying to.
actual work that we're doing?
Well, no, both the system capacity, if they have to do a system capacity charge and, sort of the connection, I'm just trying to do the math on what that 1% comes out to. And if it was $25,000, 1% would be equivalent to a project that was $2.5 million and above to recover our, a $25,000 cost. I'd like to see the $25,000 come down for ADUs, but if the average cost of an ADU is $200,000 to $400,000, which is, I don't know what I Googled it to be, which is also a lot, then you're talking about $2,500 to $4,000, which comes nowhere near the cost of covering for either the connection cost or the system capacity charge.
Do you know, Andrew, if there is a connection fee for an ADU, about how much is that?
I'm gonna have to actually answer this question.
If there's a connection, if they want to have a separate meter installed, it's typically about $17,000 if they have fire sprinklers that's required. But there's no system capacity charge for an ADU that's separately. I can give an example of a permit charge Currently,
Well, if it's less than a certain size, I think.
correct. If it's, typically, what we see within our service area is a single-family home that built an ADU, and their meter size doesn't increase beyond a 3/4 inch. Currently, we have a project in Berkeley Hills in Region 2, and the building permit value is $710,000. And so if we add 1% of that, that'd be $7,100 to incorporate a new meter if required.
Okay, so if connection fees were considered one of the fees that was covered under this bill, we'd be out 10 grand.
About, yes.
So, but there is a system capacity charge if the ADU is more than a certain square foot, right?
No, if the ADU and the existing single-family residence, their combined water demand is above a 1-inch meter or 1-inch meter or above, then the system capacity charge would be the difference between the existing credit for the 3/4 inch meter and the 1-inch.
Okay. Which, depending on the zone, is,
Depending on the region.
okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
All right, well,
Okay. Well, thank you. I will continue to keep you apprised of these. I do have a quick kind of update on legislative information, and I just wanted to share kind of on the federal and the state side. I have good news on the appropriations front. So last Friday, if you recall, what Congress did was it bifurcated the 12 appropriations bills. And last Friday, they passed what I would call it a minibus, which included 6 of the appropriations bills. And those were for the Bureau of Reclamation, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Agriculture, EPA, and NOAA. And our earmark for $2.525 million for the East Bay Shore Recycled Water Project made it into the final Army Corps of Engineer appropriation bill. So that money will be coming to the district, and these funds will help defray the cost of the pre-design and related administrative costs for the Oakland Alameda Pipeline Estuary Crossing. The remaining 6 bills will have to be acted on by the 22nd of March, or we'll see a partial government shutdown. Overall, I would say the appropriations for fiscal year 2024 and those 6 bills that I previously mentioned, for reclamation and EPA, for water recycling and water storage and CalFed and drinking water state revolving fund and clean water state revolving fund, they remained the same as fiscal year 2023, which that is good news. There were no cuts. And then Senator Padilla's low-income household water rate assistance bill was introduced recently, and the bill number is 3830, and his office was very appreciative of the support position that we took on the bill. We heard back from them once we submitted our letter. In terms of the state, there is not a lot to update you on at the moment. This week was the deadline to amend spot bills. And there were a number of spot bills this year. Spot bills are bills that are sort of intent. They don't have actually operative language in there. The language will be amended into the bills this week, so we will see a whole nother wave of bills coming through that we will be evaluating. And I imagine that there will be more things that we'll be bringing to you next month at the April board meeting. And that concludes my update. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So next we have Derek here to conduct the second reading of our campaign finance reform ordinance.
campaign finance.
All set. Okay, good afternoon. This afternoon we'll be conducting a second reading of revisions to the Campaign Finance Reform Ordinance. And I'll be starting with a brief review of recommended revisions. These were revisions made by OGC and recommended also by outside counsel that reflect changes in the law. Some of them are housekeeping revisions, and they were presented to the Ledge HR Committee without much discussion, but I did want to give you a chance to discuss them publicly, should you choose to do so. And then we'll focus really on the substantive agreements, revisions, conversation we started at the last board meeting, looking at changing contribution limits and looking at the district's prohibition on donations from contractors, and to see if you want to revise the CIFRO along those lines. So just jumping in to recommended revisions, we've updated definitions to reorganize them alphabetically and clarify definitions such as the definition of a contribution, qualified campaign expenditure, and updated the small contributor committee definition to exactly match that in the Political Reform Act. Other revisions that have been made were to adjust the small contributor committee limit biannually based on the CPI. That was formerly not in the CIFRO, and so the small contributor committee limit was $1,200 annually since 2010. Incorporate the Levine Act into the CIFRO. Update the voluntary expenditure limit to reflect CPI adjustments. Now, we have, in fact, because the CIFRO allows annual CPI adjustments, those CPI adjustments have been made for both the voluntary expenditure limit and the contribution limits. We're simply adjusting them on paper to catch up with those adjustments. Update advertisement disclaimer requirements to comply with some legal opinions. And as best practice, mandate website publishing of contribution limits, which we already do. And then other housekeeping revisions were to correct and update reference to the CPI to identify the correct price index, to clarify the definition of net debts outstanding from the election, use the non-binary there throughout the CIFRO and referencing persons, and just doing minor things like updating the Political Reform Act and other references so that they're consistent throughout the CIFRO. So those were just kind of the recommended revisions that weren't discussed much in Ledge HR. They don't appear to require much discussion unless you have any questions, but they are laid out in detail in the staff report in the BD1. Now, at the last board meeting, we began a discussion on raising contribution limits, and the first contribution limit, of course, is the contribution limits from persons. The January 9th recommendation to the Ledge HR Committee was to increase the contribution basically to reflect the CPI adjustments that have been made from 2010. At the February 13th Ledge HR Committee, the committee recommended an increase to $1,000. And then at our last board meeting on February 27th, we began a discussion on whether or not it should be raised further. And so the question today is, what limit would the board like to establish for the campaign contribution limit for persons? And I open that up to discussion for all of you.
Yes.
I wouldn't mind starting that again. So we got into it a little bit last time, and I thought some more about this. I do political campaigns for a living. I'm very familiar with what it costs to put on a campaign. I believe very deeply that voters should have an awareness of the candidates they are voting for, and that despite the fact there may or may not be a statement in the voters' pamphlet, not all voters read that. And that some amount of advertising materials, lists that candidates will use to walk precincts, and literature that they'll use to pass out, plus mailings, it adds up quickly. And so an ability to finance a campaign like that, which I've estimated is between $60,000, $80,000. It's $66,000 just to do 2 mailers to a very reduced universe, just the voters who vote 3 out of 4 times, and 3 out of the last 4 elections. So pretty much an always voter, as we call them, is $66,000. It's a lot of money to run a campaign, and I'm concerned that by having a limit, contribution limits that's too low, makes it very difficult for people to raise the money. They either have to put in their own money, which a lot of us have done in the campaigns that we do, but not everybody can afford to do that. Or they have to spend all their time trying to raise donations in relatively small amounts. And so you're somewhat dependent on having donors who can, be at the high end of the donor scale to help offset that. And so the reason, my understanding is that this campaign finance law was passed in the 1990s was that there were developers who were exerting undue influence in East Bay MUD campaigns, and this was a way to limit their influence. At the time, there were not as many what are called independent expenditure campaigns by which outside influences can actually do a campaign as long as they're not doing it coordinated with the candidate that can spend unlimited amount of money. They have to report how they're spending that money and who's contributing to that, but there is no limits to how much quote-unquote influence they can have in the campaign. In fact, I've just done some campaigns where the independent expenditure campaigns were way more influential than we were able to be, and that's just the way it is, and the way it is for us. So I think, in my opinion, it's better to have that money reported to the candidate, or have some of that money reported to the candidate, rather than forcing people who want to contribute more than $1,000 to set up their own independent expenditure campaign, which they do not have, comply with the same rules that we set here. So I'm still thinking, the state law for these campaigns, were we not to have this law of our own, would be $5,500. So for instance, in the Marin Municipal Utility District, where I've also done some campaigns, that's the limit for individuals, it's $5,500. And for small contributor PACs, would be double that, $11,000 essentially. And we can, we can reduce it if we're still wanting to be able to have a smaller contribution amount. I'd still be willing to put forth $2,500 as the top end, and double that amount, $5,000 for small contributor PACs, groups of individual donors, such as unions or other associations, the League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, et cetera, are considered small contributor PACs, could contribute twice that amount. And I think that's still keeping within our goals, which I would remind us, we're also focused on not taking contributions for anyone who has business in front of a contractor or business in front of the district. So that's still in place, firmly in place, that we take $0 for that. But for friends or family or other supporters to give $2,500 as a top limit, I don't think would be undue influence for anyone that way. So I'll leave it at that. That's my proposal instead.
So are you proposing 2,500 or?
2,500 to be indexed and 5,000 for multi-candidate or small contributor PACs.
Just a question of clarification. So are you saying as far as contractor donations, that stays as it is right now?
That's right.
Okay.
And so just on process, I will be asking for a vote on each recommendation.
Well, I'd invite discussion.
Yeah,
of
after
that
discussion
first.
is done, but yeah, I'll be just to preview the process.
I mean, I'd actually be inclined to support a higher limit.
I'd be willing
I mean,
for that too.
I can't afford to put any, really, much more than, a couple $1,000s of my own money into campaigns, and I relied on, I think we are facing a campaign season where we will have a number of open seats. And it's gonna cost between $60,000 and $80,000 for each of those folks that are serious about getting a seat to run, to run their campaigns. And, I believe when the limit was, I think my limit was 600 when I ran, or 660 or something like that. I ended up with about 20 people that maxed out, and more than half of those could have given quite a bit more, who were, good friends and colleagues and had been, working on campaigns that I'd worked on for, many, many years. And they're like, well, I can do a party for you too. But it was scrambling. I ended up with 150 or 170 contributors overall. And I spent a lot of my time, most of my time, fundraising or walking. I don't regret any of it, but it was really, really hard work. And if I'd been able to, raise and most of the folks running in an open seat, they're not gonna have, maybe have other relationships with contributor committees that can give them more. So, I strongly support the 2,500. I'd actually even be willing to go up to the state limit, since what you presented last time indicated that most special, or a lot of special districts don't have limits, or they have this, they follow the state guidelines, and our wards are the size of assembly districts, pretty much. So they're large areas, certainly larger than Marin County, Marin Water District. So anyway, that's where I'm coming from on it. And I support the no contractor contributions, the way we have it right now.
And I'll have a slide for each of those.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying in concert with, not creating an opportunity for those who actually have a profit motive to contribute. I'm all in favor of doing what we can to control the undue influence of people that seek to do business with the district.
I agree with the motive work of going, sub-issue by sub-issue, taking straw polls, but with the reservation that if we were to make a major change to the current contractor rules, then I might want to revisit the contribution limit to go probably downward, depending on what we do. But I think this is a good way to start the discussion, is going sub-issue by sub-issue. I think the most, compelling interest in having individual contribution limits is to prevent corruption. And that's the foremost reason why we have this kind of ordinance, and why we don't just allow very, even higher amounts that could invite corruption. I feel very fortunate that we don't have an apparent campaign history here at the district that indicates that. That is something that we observe in other jurisdictions. I don't feel like that's affecting EBMUD. I feel very fortunate for that, and I'd like to keep it that way. I don't know if we really have a substantial risk of that possibility by going too high. I would have normally, just with those values in mind, also considering that I think it is also better to have reliance on a larger amount of smaller donors compared to very few extremely large donors. I don't know if that's a legal basis to set a limit, but that's my personal view. But I would have been more inclined to the committee recommendation of 1,000. After hearing what Director Young and Director Linney have said, I'm open to meeting somewhere in between, or towards the 2,500 range. It's not my preference. My preference probably would have been the 1,000, but I think I'm open after hearing what they've had to say. And I'm assuming that this would anchor a double relationship with the small contributor committee. At the time, when we last did a major review, that relationship was open, in terms of what the ratio could be. I might be open when we get to that matter to have a different ratio, but I am assuming it would be at least double. That's my view.
Yeah, I just am at a disadvantage here because I wasn't here last week and I didn't see the discussion on, the video wasn't up of the meeting, and I know Clifford and Derek asked me to look at it and I tried, but I couldn't. So I'm just trying to catch up with everyone's reasoning, given it is so far from our ordinance. I mean, the ordinance plainly states the increases can go as high as CPI. So that's something that we're gonna have to change. I'm with Andy. I would prefer what the committee recommended. I would prefer the 1,000, and I'm not sure, I guess 2,000 was the small contributor limit, committee contributor limit. But also, like Andy, I'm open to the conversation. I've heard Doug, I've heard Marguerite. I know, Doug, obviously, I can't argue with you about the cost of campaigns. I can just say that mine cost, for what it's worth. It was a very competitive race. I think I raised 27,000. I think someone raised 29,000, someone raised 14,000. But obviously, I'm not, you're the expert in this area.
Did you do a mailer?
I did some mailing. I did very targeted mailing. And so, like Andy, I would have preferred to stay with the committee limits, the limits that committee stated, but we can have a discussion about it, for sure.
And April, just so you know, I only floated the idea last week. I talked briefly about it, but we didn't have any debate. We were kind of in a hurry last time.
Lisa stopped our discussion.
Oh, I see.
There was no discussion.
So I didn't miss much?
This is the
No,
first
you
I've
didn't
had.
miss much. It was almost 3 o'clock, and Lisa was, actually it was after 3 o'clock, and Lisa was anxious to conclude things in the interest of having a broader discussion, which is
Right.
merited. We said we were gonna have it now, and that people should forward their, interests, questions, et cetera, to Derek.
Okay.
That's where things were left.
Okay.
I throw in a benchmark. I know, we're about half the size of an assembly district,
Okay,
and
feels bigger.
yeah.
Feels as big.
We have 144,000 voters in our districts. That's a lot of people.
I thought voters, but
210
Voters.
population.
220,000 population.
Right.
Assembly is like 440, somewhere around there.
I guess it's been a while since my college civics class.
And I think legislative contribution limits, where a lot of money is spent, reasons why we would compare, reasons why we wouldn't compare. I think those limits are in the 4,000, mid 4,000s range.
Where are we?
I guess,
Want to adopt this or?
Well, I think we have, we're in the middle of exchanging views and different opinions, so.
Yeah, assembly districts are 288,000, so it's almost exactly half of an assembly
All right.
district. And
Well, I'd say
interestingly,
80,000, somebody's spending only $65,000 to $80,000 in an assembly race, they wouldn't make the rate, they wouldn't.
yeah.
Director Patterson.
I mean, the other thing that's interesting in assembly race is that you're really usually only talking mostly to the party, your own party. You're not communicating a lot with the other party, whereas we have nonpartisan race, so we're, a larger population to communicate with.
Well, we're also trying to motivate a voting base that ends up being quite a bit smaller because of being a down ticket.
Yeah,
It's a
Yeah, fewer
low
people
information race, people that don't, that generally haven't, run for anything before. a lot of it is just getting a name associated, even getting people to understand that East Bay Mud is something that people get elected to,
The one other comment I'll add to this, which is we've mostly, regardless, if you're running against an incumbent who has an incumbent advantage of having name recognition, of having built presumably over a period of time some sort of base in their district of people who like them and are better known than when they first ran, you're also up against a disadvantage as a challenger that way. And so again, you're kind of weighing, in a democratic system, I mean, personally, I like it when nobody runs against me, but in a democratic system, you want to have at least an ability for people to run against you and challenge you and make sure you're doing a good job and daylight that and challenge that. And again, if you have a hard time running, it's easier for me to find $1,000 donors than probably, a standard person running against me or something, and as an incumbent. And so again, another reason to allow someone who has some base but doesn't have to spend all their time finding those people and can, get the larger donations, as Marguerite said, people who can afford the $1,000 but would be willing to give more. Not looking to influence necessarily, but just wanting to see a person that they believe in get into office. I think we have to consider that as a factor too, in deciding what number we want to set it at. And, obviously it's, what is the number are you open to more corruption if it's $1,000 limit, or it's a $2,000 limit, or a $5,000 limit? And so again, I throw out the $2,500. I'm willing to go in either direction, but I think $1,000 is too low.
Director Patterson, can I ask you for your thoughts, because you sat on the you sit on this committee, the Human Resources Ledge Committee, and I think your committee heard this topic first.
Well, personally, I would be looking at raising it a bit. The cost of doing business is much greater now. The printing of the signs, all the things that you have to do in a campaign. And I'd kind of yield a little bit to Director Lenny, because he's engaged in that on a regular basis, and I'm from a bit afar. A lot of the people I've supported over the years have been in office for quite a while, and they have a following, and that's been uplifting. Kind of sorry to see Barbara Lee get out of the race, but you can see how that has emerged over time. So I think raising it a bit I'm in favor of that.
So what I've heard so far is 3 directors are interested in raising it to $2,500 at least, possibly higher, and then $5,000 for the small contributor committees. And then Director Katz and Director Chan, your preference is to stay with the $1,000 recommendation of the Ledge HR committee, but you're open to going higher.
I think that was also what Director Patterson said. He said raise it a bit. That's what I heard anyway. But yeah, I'm open to going higher.
In the interest of, I do have, some, discomfort on this, and, it's not reasonable for us to invest in study or having more comparison charts. I think, we're in a, I would put out a straw number of 2,000 to see what, if that's something that brings us to consensus. But I'm open to where we can get 4 votes.
I mean, that's in order to get consensus, and obviously this can always be raised or lowered in the future. I'd be satisfied with 2,000 as a place to end up.
I'd be okay with that. I mean, I do think we have some seats that are going to be open in the fall, and having candidates running who know that they have some room to, you know, raise money and build support at a higher level instead of saying, how the heck am I gonna do this where it's at right now? Because that was part of what went into my math. It's like, how am I gonna do this? I don't, you know, so I did it. I think my campaign probably would have cost more than $100,000 today.
Yeah.
But you just ran in, right?
Your
Not
initial campaign.
your most recent campaign.
I didn't, well, no, I didn't, I had a challenger
Right.
last time, kind of. But I raised 25,000, I think I raised $25,000 last time. But it was easier because I was an incumbent and I got labor support. I didn't have any labor support. Well, very little labor support in my first run. You know, but it was still work.
It was work for me too. I mean, I raised 27,000. I
Yeah.
think. Someone else raised 29,000, but it seems to me like all these numbers are sub 30,000.
So, I mean,
And then, I mean, if you look at 30,000 is doable.
so are we at
So, do
consensus
we-
at 4,
yeah.
I think?
What are you looking for at this point?
Well, so what I'm hearing is possible consensus on 2,000 for persons and 4,000 for small contributor committees. So I would just,
2,000 and 4,000.
2,000 for persons, okay. So that we will just start there, and if we just had a motion second and a vote, I will make that amendment.
I do have a question for you.
Yes.
What about the ordinance that says that that we can raise our contributor limits according to CPI? So is that something that has to be addressed or changed?
No, that would remain in effect, so,
But we're not doing it right now, so we're suspending that ordinance right now.
yeah, so as of the effective date of the ordinance, the campaign contribution limit, if you were to vote on it, would be $2,000 for a person, and then it would be adjusted thereafter biannually based on CPI.
Yeah, that's a separate
For the
thing.
next
We already said we're minor revisions. It's
So the next
adjusting everything to
CPI
go with the
adjustment,
CPI.
the next CPI adjustment would be for the 2026 election.
I believe so. What, pretty sure it maintains that schedule.
So, may I?
Yes.
I know that, that the general counsel is looking at this, and it's, all of this stuff is coming up on different screens, but, and taking it one by one, but my support for 2,000 might be conditional on the contractor rules.
Okay.
You know, and I think Director Linney has already stated that he believe that these limits would be money that can be received from family and friends. Is that not what you said?
Yeah,
I just want to make,
I'm fine with the, in fact, I think it reinforces our efforts to keep out undue influence from contractors that way, so yes.
so what my question is in a motion, I mean, I would like those together, those two pieces, the ban on the contractors and the raising of the small committee limits and the personal contribution limits.
So I can go
Together.
through each slide, and we can do a straw poll and then put together
Yeah,
a
that's
single
what I
motion
think.
at the end.
April's saying.
Yeah.
I think I agree, that makes sense.
Okay.
All right.
Take it as a whole.
So our next issue is the revising the campaign contribution limit for small contributor committees. Historically, it has been twice the limit for persons. And so this is, again, is open for discussion. The original recommendation to Ledge HR was to raise it from $1,200 to $1,800 to reflect CPI adjustments, which had not actually been made. So that would have been a new ceiling. And the February 13th recommendation of the committee was to increase to $2,000. And so here we are, it's open for discussion.
I think we kind of already discussed this,
Yeah,
right?
it's sort of double.
Yeah.
So that would
Whatever we
be,
pick, double.
So straw poll, I'm hearing
4,000.
4,000, okay. Okay. This was an issue raised by Director Coleman at the last meeting. Currently, under the CIFRO, a candidate may loan up to $10,000 to their own campaign. California law sets a $100,000 limit on campaigns for city or county office. Would the board like to change the personal loan limit to campaigns, and if so, to what amount?
I think that should be linked to CPI. So if this was something, I Googled basically what is $100,000 worth in today's dollars, you know, based on a 1990 figure, and I think I came up with $22,000. I'm sure you could come up with something more precise, but I do think it should be linked to CPI.
So we would, if I'm understanding you correctly, we would leave the limit at $10,000, but add a provision to allow biennial adjustments for CPI. Is that correct?
Well, if this $10,000 was something that was decided on in the 1990s now, then I think we need to change that to today's dollars.
I think 100,000 was set under California law in the 90s, and it hasn't been changed.
I'm talking about our
I
$10,000.
think our $10,000, I don't remember if we changed it when we modified the CFRO in 2010.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't believe we did.
Yeah, I
I
don't.
don't think so.
That's
I
why
don't remember either.
I did some research, and I remember reading that the $10,000 figure was from the 1990s, and that's why I did that simple calculation of what is that in today's dollars. But I definitely think it should be adjusted for inflation. That's fair.
I think, you know, all else being equal, I would agree that we should allow for a proportionate loan to when we first adopted the policy. There is an interaction with the contractor donations that Director Young brought up in a prior meeting, which is if we start allowing, you know, kind of a loan, you know, receiving a contractor donation and then a remedy of recusal, then it starts to have some interactions with the loan. So I think we may need to revisit the scheme, you know, of all of these provisions at the end. But I'm in agreement that an inflation adjustment, probably to $25,000, and then CPI going forward is something that I think is reasonable.
Agreed.
That works.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the proposal I've heard on this item is 25,000 plus CPI adjustments. Are there any others?
Yes. That's good.
That's fine.
Hearing none, I will move on. And so this has been a topic of discussion. And so the CIFRO currently prohibits donations from persons contracting with the district for contracts that are awarded by the board and not obtained as a result of the competitive bidding process. That means that contracts that aren't low bid contracts. The timeframe is the donations are prohibited at any time between submittal of a proposal and 1 year following completion of performance for those contracts that are awarded, or final determination of the district to reject a bid. And the CIFRO has essentially a punitive measure banning the award of non-competitive contract, meaning a non-low bid contract, to any contractor who violates CIFRO for 1 year from the date of the violation. So that's the current text in the Campaign Finance Reform Ordinance. January 19th recommendations to the committee were to prohibit donations from any district contractor not subject to low bid, not just for board-approved contracts. And that revision was suggested because OGC was informed that that was the intent of the board back in 2010. However, Risha has pointed out that that could be an administrative nightmare to try and keep you informed of every single contract with the bid. I mean, as you know, we have many, many contracts for, you know, just a few $1,000s that the board never sees. So that revision isn't necessarily recommended anymore. it was also, the recommendation was prohibit a contractor who violates CIFRO's donation provisions from being awarded any contract, even if the contract is competitively bid. Now, on February 13th, the committee requested the following revisions to look at eliminating the prohibition on contracting with contractors to violate CIFRO, and that is so that that prohibition would not get in the way of the district's ability to do business in situations where there may be only one qualified contractor for a contract, and instead require board recusal of any board member who has received a donation from a contractor. So that is more closely to how the Levine Act handles donations from contractors and other persons with matters before a public agency. So the questions to go through on the contractor donation prohibition provisions of CIFRO are, do we maintain the status quo? Or an option is to eliminate the prohibition on contracting altogether. In which case the Levine Act would apply for any donations above $250. And instead require contractor reporting of donations, recusal of a board member who has received a donation, return of a contractor donation given in violation of CIFRO, and also to provide for censure of any board member who repeatedly accepts contributions in violation of the CIFRO. Now, just to preview, if the board just wants to essentially maintain the status quo, it can be tweaked to prohibit only donations from contractors, only for board-approved contracts or any district contract. At this point, we're recommending the former. And then in terms of the extent of the ban, prohibit award of any contract not subject to low bid, which is the status quo, or prohibit award of any contract, even those competitively bid. So there are many ways to tweak the current $0 contract provisions.
Well, I'll start out with what I am not in favor of the recusal approach. I'd prefer to keep something closer to what we have now with, go back to the last slide, with the, board-approved contracts, because we don't, we don't know who, I don't, at least, I think that if somebody becomes aware of having received a contribution from somebody who's a contractor with the district, even if it's not board-approved, it would be appropriate to disclose that and to seek guidance from General Counsel's office as to whether there are any, decisions or policy matters that would, require them to be recused or would encourage them to be recused from.
But how does that work for a non-incumbent board or non-incumbent?
Well, it can't. No, it wouldn't.
Person
It
who's
wouldn't.
running.
Well, any district contractor, I'm talking about any district contractor one, the ones that aren't board-approved contracts.
No, I'm talking about somebody who's running for office, who is not part of EBMUD, has no idea who contractors are.
Well, no, ROCC provides a list of board-approved, of
Two
prohibited,
people who have filed for running.
who are candidates. You get I got a list that was like, here's who you can't accept money from. Under our CIFRO, under the Campaign Finance Reform Ordinance. But I think, I appreciate Risha's point that, having a 45-page list of all district contracts would be, crazy. And that, I don't know what I think about the low bid, excluding or including, or adding the inclusion of the competitively bid contracts where, I guess what we're saying, what's the case there is that we're compelled to accept the low bid contracts. So
In theory, although you still get to vote to award them, and so I suppose in a scenario in which all of you received a donation and, but yes, the
Well, I
theory
mean,
is
I
that
think there's-
if you're required to award to the low bidder, then there can't be any undue influence through
Yeah,
political.
well, if somebody hasn't ever received a contribution from even the low bid contracts, I don't feel strongly about bringing in the low bid contracts to the prohibition. I would support it if other people felt it was acceptable. I am definitely not in favor of opening the door, though, to the next page's options.
Yes.
So, just to address the 2010 revisions, I don't recall there being a different intent than what was, what we adopted. So, I don't think it's, off the table to be, discussing, the goal of having campaigns that are run without the participation of contractors. I think that is the best practice, is to run a campaign without taking contributions from agency contractors. But we do have this practical problem of what happens if a major contractor who may be operating in an environment where there's very few amounts of bidders, that could disrupt business. And that's another good reason for candidates to avoid soliciting and for those contractors to avoid contributing. But we're trying to design this ordinance, and so I also am concerned that the remedy that the Living Act introduces is really new. And while it does seem to fit certain purposes, like appointed officials in those contexts where there has never been any remedy for elected officials who are serving in an appointed capacity, and I think we want to start thinking about that. I don't know if we are ready to look at data points happening in other local governments and to understand that this is really what's working. So without really having the benefit of more study and greater understanding, for example, I could say that this is a good principle, with more information. I'm really reluctant to tinker without having more information that helps us think it through, because we just have a very particular contracting environment, and we don't appear, from my knowledge of our history of campaigns at the district, we don't have a history of the competitively bid contractors contributing to director races. If we did seem to have that history or potential, we really would want to revisit it. But I don't see that in our history. So that gives me more comfort to leave it the way it is. And because I'm concerned about perverse incentives, particularly the potential for a candidate to have a loan, get elected, solicit, and then recover from the loan and just know that they could recuse. That's one of those, like, well, what is happening? If other jurisdictions follow that model, what could happen? And so those are concerns. I'm not saying that either approach is perfect, but I'm saying that we know that the system that we have here seems to be adequate, and I can see a problem with this potential approach. So I think that the recusal remedy is concerning in this context to me, and that's why I'm more inclined to keep it the way it is. So that's. But I'm not saying that we should never consider it in the future. Just that we do need to get this ordinance complete, so that we can accomplish the housekeeping revisions that council has proposed, and some of the other modifications that the board is interested in. So this seems to be something that requires more study before we could really engage in. So that's my preference. I'm in agreement with Director Young.
I think I'm in agreement with what I just heard Andy say. Maybe this is not one that we have to try and tackle right now. I'm in agreement with what I've heard so far, and what I put out before is basically, I think it's better for the public, both in perception and reality, the public that we serve, that, we're above reproach when it comes to contractors donating to our campaigns and looking to influence. I mean, the contributions that we get should come from the public, from our friends, from people who believe that we would do a good job or are doing a good job in this, and not who do not have any kind of financial connections to what that donation may or may not be, but might look like. And like Andy said, we haven't really had issues with this. I think the ordinance as it is working. If we want to tweak that later, I am also cognizant that we want to get this done so that anybody who might be thinking about running this time knows what the rules of engagement are, so.
Okay.
Ditto. There's, let me just say, I do think everyone, I agree with everyone that the whole idea of recusal and censure could be really confusing and could be very hard to implement. I think the January 9th committee actually expanded the prohibition. So to state prohibits donations from any district contractor not subject to low bid. I know that everyone's saying maintain status quo, but I wouldn't mind adding that. I think that would be a good addition. I just think it makes it very clear to the contractor and to a potential candidate, exactly that they should not be trying to get money from contractors. And that's the message that we want to send.
And what's the hang up I have is, what's the penalty for if a contribution slips by, either because you didn't notice they were on the list or the contractor doesn't know about the prohibition, they give you $500 or $20 or whatever. I think the recusal and the return and the eliminate some sort of penalty for the contractors is what the problematic part of this is, a recusal and that sort of thing. So I'd be interested in what's the clarification, what's the penalty right now for violating this prohibition under the current ordinance?
So currently, the prohibition is the penalty is, it bans the award of any non-competitive contract to a contractor who violates the donation prohibition. So any non-low bid contract.
Right, well, what's the enforcement, so that they would not be then entitled to bid on any future contracts?
Correct. Or
That's
be
a pretty big,
Yeah.
that's a pretty big hammer
for 1 year.
for 1
For
year.
1 year. Yeah, I don't know, that seems,
Is there a
everybody could
penalty?
live with that.
Is there a penalty for the candidate who accepts these
Currently, there
contributions?
is no penalty for the candidate.
But it would constitute a violation.
Correct. It would constitute a violation of the ordinance, so you could be subject to censure, potential.
So it puts the burden on the contractor,
Yes.
which frankly is an easier place to put it. It's like, if you're a contractor with EBMUD, don't be making any contributions.
Yeah, well, given how long it takes to have a board member get an investigation happening on a board member who's done something in violation of any of our policies, I'd say it's, certainly more straightforward. I mean, you could say they have to return, returning the contribution.
But it's the rest of the ordinance, right? I mean, I remember in the ordinance, Risha would send a warning letter right? And I'm talking about violations of the campaign ordinance. And eventually, if it's not remedied after warnings, then it's something that's sent to the press.
That's if you don't close out. That warning is if you don't close out your filings at the end of the campaign, and if you don't file the necessary FPPC forms, then we're required to take steps to try to get those forms and then report you in the press.
I mean, so the penalty could be expanded for this, for candidates who receive contributions from contractors and who don't refund it or something.
Does our ordinance have penalties authorized currently that are enforceable by the board or by the FPPC?
So there is a section on violations under the enforcement, and so it primarily applies to reporting violations requirements, and any legal action for injunctive relief or civil liability the court may award to a plaintiff. So in theory, you could be sued for violation of the ordinance by any district constituent, anyone with standing. And so that would be the relief. A lawsuit could be brought against you for civil or injunctive relief. Of course, and then there's nothing in paragraph 7 shall be construed as limiting the authority of any law enforcement agent, prosecuting attorney, or other person to enforce the provisions of this ordinance under any circumstances where such law enforcement agency, prosecuting agency, or other person has lawful authority to do so. Now, I don't believe that violation of this specific ordinance is a misdemeanor, unlike, for instance, we do have other ordinances, our watershed rules and regulation. We have an ordinance stating that violation of those rules and regulations are a misdemeanor. But so.
Any other person also could mean another board member,
Yes.
right? Or, I mean, I don't know how many of us pore over, the FPPC reports that we file.
I think this is an interesting, issue for future revision, that enforceability, what is the best practice for a provision like this, and is it a private right of action? Is it the state's FPPC? And, it does sound like we have a few substantial questions about whether the existing ordinance is enforceable. It sounds inherent that the board as a whole could censure a colleague for a violation. It's just an inherent right that we have, that we could do that. And that's not as meaningful as a financial penalty that the FPPC could enforce. I don't think we're, there's a few cities that have their own FPPCs. I don't think that's a reasonable thing for us to, create. But that is, I think, an important question for future examination, but may not be as urgent as getting the revisions that we need accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that, we have a policy that, at least as far as I know, it's been working. So the discussion of, it's working. So are we basically a solution in search of a problem by doing something now? It doesn't seem like it's very compelling to me to do with that side of it. Right now, we have tools available to us. If it were to become a problem at a future date, based on what Derek just provided. So I'd say, I guess the remaining question is, sounds like everybody's in agreement about basically keeping it as it is, the one revision being, should we include low bid contracts? All contracts that are awarded by the board, including those that are part of the competitive bidding process. And that'd be fine. As I said, I don't have I'm fine including those.
I think it makes sense to me that we would prohibit those. I think it would be helpful to just get some context from staff about, because we're not adopting them, we have, even less awareness.
No, these would be board-approved contracts. It would be ones that we're adopting.
Okay, that's the current.
Yeah, but
ordinance.
that includes low bid contracts. We still make those awards, even though it's a low bid.
So you're proposing that we would,
Include the low bid contracts as well, because we approve, so it'd be all board-approved contracts.
yeah, I think, I mean, I think that's the ideal ordinance. The risk is that if a contractor just, and a candidate just don't know what they're doing, that we could have some disruption. And
Risha's going to provide, the secretary of the board will provide a list of who you can take money, who you cannot take money from. These are the, contractors as of, whatever this date, here's who you can't take money from.
Right, yeah, I think if we're thinking through those implementing things, then that's something I'd like to see. I just didn't want to see the recusal be the workaround, because I don't feel comfortable with that. I think the prohibition is the right remedy at this time.
So what I'm hearing from Director Young is that the prohibition on donations, either giving or accepting donations, would apply to all contractors, not just low bid, and the
All
penalty.
contractors approved by the board.
All
All
contracts,
contractors
yes,
approved by the board.
And then the penalty of not being eligible for award of a contract would apply to all contractors, not just low bid. Is that correct?
So we're pretty much maintaining status quo. Right, and
Status
then-
quo,
Status
except
quo.
expanding to all contractors rather than simply
Right, so we're not, we've eliminated the Levine Act, implementing the Levine Act in place of the status quo. Just
Well, the Levine Act still applies to all contracts.
Okay.
But that is a $250 threshold. It has its own recusal requirements. And the addition to the CIFRA was simply to state that fact so that there's no confusion.
Okay,
And then the $0 limits are like a subset, a much
Right.
more stringent and unique requirement that you've put on donations that's not required by the Levine Act.
Right, and so the Levine Act, because we have a zero, the Levine Act doesn't apply, because theoretically,
The Levine Act would apply in situations, for instance, where someone may oppose a contract and so show up and have like other bidders, for instance, or perhaps neighborhood groups.
well,
They are
no,
interested
the-
parties
this
under the-
applies to submission of the the current.
Yes, this is different than the Levine, our CIFRA is different than the Levine Act. But
Right, but it applies, so if there's five, five, because we're including low bids, if it includes five, if there's five bidders on a low bid contract, all five of those bidders are precluded from contributing to a campaign until their bid is rejected.
Correct.
Until the bid is basically granted and theirs is rejected. But the
Correct.
person that got the bid can't contribute until the project is complete.
1 year after completion of the project.
Right. I think that works.
So if I could just recap, what I've heard is on personal donations, $2,000. On small contributor committee donations, contribution limits, $4,000, which is double the contribution limit for personal donations. On personal loans, you want to raise the personal loan limit to $25,000 and allow for annual CPI adjustments. And then status quo as to the prohibition on contractor donations, except also expand it to low bid contracts. Any
yes.
contract
Just say all
awarded by the
contracts
board-
approved by the board.
All contracts approved by the
That
board.
require board approval, might be the best way to phrase that.
Did I get that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So I would just like a motion second and vote on that, and then I will make those changes, and I will bring it back to the next board meeting for adoption.
And then maybe just for completeness, the board is also recommending all the housekeeping recommendations too.
Well, yes, that,
Just like we're capturing everything.
yes. I mean, ultimately, there'll be a final vote that adopts the amendments, so. But in just reviewing past practice, whenever the board has made any specific recommendation to change the CIFRA, they've voted on each one, so.
move that we adopt the individual small contributor loan limits and contractor revisions, as well as the housekeeping revisions. I think that's everything.
And the personal loan.
And the 2,000, 4,000?
Yeah, 2,000, 4,000, $25,000 loan limit. Current prohibition on contractors revised to include low bid contracts. In other words, all contracts subject to board approval, and all of the various housekeeping provisions, revisions that staff has recommended.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor of the said motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered.
Thank you. So at the March 26th board meeting, I will bring the redlined revised CIFRO back to you with an ordinance to adopt the changes once you've reviewed and approved them. So, and that will be our continued second reading. At that point, the revised ordinance will have been adopted, and it will go into effect 30 days later, April 25th, 2024, assuming there are no further revisions that you would like. Thank you.
Okay.
Really appreciate the board's deliberation on this topic. This was very helpful. Next is to talk about the ad hoc committee for the voluntary agreements. I think as the board's aware, we're working with the state and various stakeholders on the update to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. We are at a point where staff would like input from the board on some key issues related to the plan and the voluntary agreements, and are asking the board to consider appointing an ad hoc committee to provide guidance. We have Alice Toohey here, our Environmental Affairs Officer, who has a brief presentation before the board discusses this item.
Thank you, Clifford, and thank you and good afternoon to the members of the board. We appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. As Clifford alluded to, there's a lot happening right now in the Bay Delta regulatory world, so it's a good time for us to meet and just give you, I just have a couple slides, just some quick updates, and then just a discussion of some of the items that are coming up to us that we really are hoping to get some board input on. So just a brief reminder on background for those of you who are not kind of living and breathing this every day as I am. The State Water Board is updating its water quality control plan for the Bay Delta. They began this process in 2009, so it's been a rather lengthy process. Just given the geographic scope of the Bay Delta, they broke it into two phases. Phase one is the San Joaquin River tributaries and Southern Delta salinity standards. They did adopt those plan updates in 2018, and that's been the subject of litigation that's still pending. Phase two is the Sacramento River and eastern tributaries, which includes the McCallum. So that's us, that's our focus. Typically, the state board has a process where they'll do a scientific basis report, where they'll sort of look at the state of the science, they'll recommend plan updates, and then there'll be an environmental document, although they've kind of mixed the order of that around a little bit. So the original scientific basis report, which was released in 2017, and then the subsequent framework based on that, had recommended an unimpaired flow approach. So that was 55% unimpaired flow within a range of 45 to 65%. The district's analysis at that time and since then showed that that would have potentially very significant impacts to the McCallum River temperature management, as well as very significant reductions in district supply. The alternative that's been proposed, and this has been somewhat led by the California Natural Resources agencies, is in partnership with the water agency community, is this idea of the voluntary agreements, or as we're starting to call it, the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program. Healthy Rivers and Landscapes, yes. People are getting hung up on the term voluntary agreement and thinking that there's not going to be enforcement, and there actually is, so. Yeah, I proposed we call them the involuntary agreements. Nobody went for that. They liked Healthy Rivers and Landscapes better. I keep trying. So the VAs were proposed as an alternative. There was an MOU that was negotiated that EBMUD signed in August of 2022. As a result of that, the state board issued a supplement to their scientific basis report in January of 2023 that looked at the science around the voluntary agreements and showed that they would meet the proposed narrative objectives. I'm happy to say that a peer review, just an independent peer review, was just posted by the state board that showed generally consensus that looked like the science behind the VAs was sound in terms of meeting those narrative objectives. The state board released a staff report last fall that evaluated both unimpaired flow and the voluntary agreements, and the district did submit a comment letter as well as participating in a panel in a state board hearing. So again, just a reminder, the McCalmy River VA proposal, what sort of distinguishes the VA approach from unimpaired flow is that it combines flow with habitat restoration. So for the McCalmy River, we are looking at an increase in spring flows above our current joint settlement agreement requirements in dry, below normal, and above normal years. I should say predominantly in the spring, we have the ability to use some flows for fall pulses, as well as a significant creation of new habitat, 25 acres of new floodplain, 1 acre of new rearing habitat, and screening priority diversions on the lower McCalmy River to protect fish. Our proposal also includes funding for habitat, water purchases, and a robust science program. So, in terms of where things are headed, so there's a lot of activity among the VA parties, and then there's also a state board process that's ongoing, and those two obviously intersect. The VA parties are working with the state, including the state board and DWR and CDFW, on negotiating the agreements that would be needed to implement this program. So that includes a global agreement, which is sort of the overarching structure. That includes the governance program, a science plan, a strategic plan, and a plan for funding. And then each individual tributary and the delta would have an implementing agreement and an enforcement agreement. So that implementing agreement basically says who does what when. So for example, we would say that East Bay Mud is going to make releases of a certain amount during certain year types. It would specify our habitat contributions. And then the enforcement agreements would provide regulatory protection and then remedies for not meeting obligations. So what that means is, we would be signing that enforcement agreement potentially with the state board, wherein they would guarantee that they wouldn't be, for the duration of the 8-year term, they would not be setting additional flow standards on us. We would have some measure of regulatory protection, and then there would also be remedies identified if we did not meet our obligations. In terms of the State Water Board process, so this says proposed VA workshop. It is no longer proposed. It has been agendized. So there is going to be a 3-day State Board workshop in April 24th through 26th. That is going to be an opportunity for the VA parties to present a lot more information on the program. So getting into more details of how we develop the flow and non-flow measures, what the accounting is to make sure that we are meeting our obligations, governance and participation, and just making it really clear that we do want participation from tribal entities, NGOs, and that we have opportunities for that, talking about the science program, and then talking about the enforcement and the accountability and the transparency that's being developed as part of this program. So that 3-day workshop, I do want to stress that will be like other state board workshops, or where there'll be opportunities for public comment. Members of the public can call in. People can also request the opportunity to present panels. So we're hoping that that's a good opportunity for engagement and to get input from the public and from the state board as we finalize the program. The next step would be for the state board to develop what's called the program of implementation. So this is where they actually identify the plan updates. And what they've signaled to us is that they plan to do a program of implementation for both unimpaired flow and for the voluntary agreement program. So currently they are kind of leaving both options open. And I apologize, this slide is incorrect. We are not going back in time. I keep trying to do that. They are planning to make the state board is planning to make a decision later this year, or I think more realistically, early next year. So that would be them deciding which approach that they want to take and what specific measures. So in terms of why we're here today, as Clifford mentioned and as I've shown you, there's a lot of activity going on right now in terms of negotiating these agreements, negotiating these enforcement agreements. There's a state board process that, regardless of the outcome, is going to have pretty significant impacts on East Bay Mud. We want to make sure that we have an opportunity to get your feedback and on the board as we're negotiating these agreements and working through this process. So our recommendation is to appoint an ad hoc committee of 2 members. If you move forward with that, we would look to schedule the first meeting for later in March and then hold subsequent meetings as needed. And I do just want to stress, this does not, if we do this approach, that does not preclude us from having additional briefings for the whole board or info memos or whatever information you want. And, we are going to continue our process engaging with the state, with the other VA parties, and continue our outreach to other McCollum stakeholders. Yes?
What do you envision the workload to be for members of the ad hoc committee? We're talking about a meeting every couple weeks, or are we talking about,
Daily. No, I'm kidding.
attend the April
Yeah.
workshop? I mean, what's your?
Yeah, I think I'm envisioning, I think, we would want to see, obviously, it would be somewhat dependent on what the ad hoc committee members felt, like in terms of the involvement they wanted. But I think if we could even just have like a monthly meeting, that would be helpful. There might be periods where it is a little more intense, like especially as we, get into sort of finalizing agreements, as the state board is starting to kind of make its decisions on what it's going to implement. But yeah, I think, maybe like once a month or every few weeks. I don't know if you were thinking something different.
Yeah, I think starting initially that way. I think depending on the direction of where things go, we just may have discussions with the full board. But I think there's at least one initial meeting that, will provide some background and probably another follow-up to get some feedback. And then from there, I think we're going to have to decide, whether there's a need to continue or brief the entire board.
And certainly anybody who wants to attend or listen in on the 3-day state board workshop, it's going to be exciting.
To me, it makes sense to have somebody from the planning committee and somebody from finance, and, without having that be the same person from both. Which I don't think. April's on both.
Yeah, so there's only a handful of combinations with two persons where, because this discussion will intersect with 3 of the standing committees, the planning, HR, and finance. There is a possibility, if there's going to be a finance discussion, that we just have one of the ad hoc committee members recuse himself. But, I went through the 2 board member combinations. The only ones that work would be Director Young and Director Katz, or Director Young and Director Patterson, or Director Linney and Director Katz, or Director Linney and Director Patterson. The others that have a potential finance committee conflict, but we can address that by, you can get a 3-person committee where you have Director Linney, Director Katz, and Director Patterson, or Director Chan, Director Patterson, and Director Katz. Otherwise, all the other combinations will present a problem.
Conflict out. I'm willing to do it.
Yeah, I'm open to serve on
There you go.
I'm interested as well, and I understand that we would need to avoid the subject matter to be a finance committee meeting unless one of the finance committee members stepped out of that particular segment, which I think could be manageable. Because it does sound like we have some discretion in how we use the committee. I do think it's important that we have an ad hoc committee so that the staff have a way of getting advice about the issues related to the discussions, so that we don't just have the proposed agreement show up on our agenda without having any feedback from the elected representatives of the public. That's important. We don't have an opportunity to include the full board in an environment where we don't have a formal proceeding before the state board, which is really the way that a subject matter like this should be conducted. But that's not what's occurring. And it is good that there are going to be public workshops so that the public can engage in the statewide issues that are going on. I have a lot of confidence that our staff are negotiating the EBMUD specific issues in a way that is consistent with our values. And I would like to make sure that and as you've said, the plan is to not use the ad hoc committee as a substitute for the scope of issues that can be presented to the full board. When we, at the appropriate interval and with the appropriate scope, it sounds like we should continue to receive briefings. But the matters that are sensitive in terms of the negotiations with the state, we do need to have a mechanism so that we can have that advice.
So what I'm hearing is Director Young, Director Cast, and Director Patterson. The only challenge with that combination is Director Cast and Patterson are both on the finance, and then Director Young and Patterson are on the Ledge HR. And so I think for simplicity, if you want, it could be Director Young and Director Katz, or Director Young and Director Patterson. Otherwise, there's the intersection with two of the committees.
What say you?
You guys want to flip a coin?
If it were, are Directors Young and Patterson both on Ledge HR?
No.
No.
Director Young and Director Patterson on Ledge HR, yes.
Oh, right. That's right. So really, actually, the only combination that's free of, well,
There's less finance discussion, I think, for the VA, so I think we could have two on the finance committee, but if something came up in finance, we would ask one of the board members just to recuse himself from that discussion.
I think that's manageable to have, to avoid creating a finance committee meeting. I think that seems manageable. It's our committee system is I'm not.
Yeah, but there's no combination with Director Young. That's all. If you're.
right, because I'm on the I'm on Ledge HR with Bill.
So if, like I said, it could be Director Young and Director Katz, Director Young and Director Patterson.
But if it were Director Young and Director Patterson, would they be noticed Ledge HR committee meetings? Is that?
That would be at Ledge HR.
No, that wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work. Yeah.
Okay.
So Young and Patterson doesn't work. Linney and Patterson.
Young and Patterson, wouldn't work, but Young and Director Young and Director Katz could work.
And Lenny and Patterson could work.
Director Lenny and Director Patterson could work. But I didn't hear Director Lenny volunteering.
Shuttle.
Yeah, and our committees that are normally, have a system that works, make it hard to do this. I think what's most important is that we be providing, full information about what we're able to share out with the full board in an open setting. Are we able to is the full board able to receive memos that go one way out from staff to the full board about some of these negotiation issues?
We could do that. Yeah.
We can definitely do, we can do memos. I'm happy to come back at some point if there are updates. For example, maybe after the April workshops, that's a chance, maybe that would be a time we'd want to come back to the full board and just kind of, talk about how things went. So.
Yeah, I think just because we do have, the full interest across the board, and we want to make sure that everybody's getting the information, and anybody could communicate directly with staff, just not with each other.
So I think the question at hand is the Director Katz or Director Patterson with Director Young?
That's why I said flip.
But it sounds like Director Patterson could only pair with Director Lenny.
Oh, true,
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
you're right. So I think
Then
the
it's
only
down to one, then it's down to one combination.
Director Young and Director Katz.
Bill, is that acceptable?
Director Patterson? Is that okay if it's Director Young and Director Katz?
Yeah, I think as long as they're familiar with everything that's happened up country and have that history, if you haven't been regularly attending and keeping up, it's going to be hard to catch up.
Yeah, and we thank you for that. That's a good point. We have been. I will just mention, we have been doing a lot of work with the other Upper Macomb, other stakeholders, the other diverters on the Macomb River, and so we can certainly make sure that that's part of our initial sort of presentation when the ad hoc committee first meets, is we can kind of go through some of those issues and talk about that.
Yeah. And I think the thing to keep in mind, and I'm not drumming necessarily for me, but we got partnerships up there, and we got relationships that have been formed over years. And with Coleman being gone, and me out of it, I'm not looking for another job, but we gotta make sure we're forceful with this, because if you don't, if you get out of the game this time, you're gonna lose a lot in the McCullum. So you got a lot riding on it.
Well, I would say, I don't think there's any of us that are not in full support of the district's proposal for how to get this done.
Yeah, no,
And that, that anybody's gonna,
I'm good at working second level or first level, doesn't matter.
Okay, so I hear it's Director Young and Director Katz. I don't know if,
Do we need
If
a?
they more
and
discussion.
if there are issues associated with UMRA, I mean, we could bring them, they should be brought to UMRA and to the full board, I think, as well.
okay, so,
So just for, it's a little stale, but I was a co-chair on the Cal-Fed Bay Delta Advisory Committee, so I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the players, because they don't change that much. So I'm
All right,
happy
well, I'll
to do it.
move the recommendation to the ad hoc committee of Director Young and Director Katz.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion indicate by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Got it.
thank you, Alice.
Thank you. We will be in touch with you about scheduling a meeting.
We get to work with Alice?
You do?
Yes. I hope that's an incentive and not I hope you're not
No, that
regretting it.
wasn't, I was gonna say something at the top. Does that mean we also get to work with you?
When do you think we'll have an opportunity to present, the maximum scope, feasible to the full board?
Yeah, like I said, I think in terms of timing, there's going to be a 3-day workshop in April with the state board. We're going to get a lot of input from them. There's going to be a lot of dialogue. So I think, I would say maybe thinking sometime in May would be a good time to come back, because at that point, we'll be able to kind of share some of some of the flavor of some of those discussions, if that's resulting in any changes to the agreements. If you're comfortable with that approach, that would be my recommendation.
That makes sense to me, and I think if we're, the ad hoc committee can make sure that we're directing staff to report out written memos to the full board, so that there's transparency about what we're doing in this.
Yeah. And if I may, make one additional recommendation. So I should have mentioned this, as part of that workshop, about a month in advance, the state board is going to be sending out a package of information that's going to include advanced drafts. They're still drafts, but advanced drafts of a lot of these agreements that we've been working on. So, that also will be available to the public, and we can certainly let the board know when that becomes available, so that everyone can kind of take a look at those documents.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you, Alice. Next, we have a resolution to consider 2 actions related to the lease of our Oakport property to Supply Bank, and we have Andrew Lee here to provide a brief presentation prior to considering the resolution.
Good afternoon, board members. For your determination and discussion this afternoon is the Oakport development lease. So for background and as an introduction, the district entered into an exclusive negotiation agreement in 2018 to allow Supply Bank to complete the environmental review and entitlement process to develop the district's Oakport property. The environmental review has been completed, and the city of Oakland has issued conditional permits and other project approvals in July of 2023 for this development. So for today, the staff is requesting the board to approve a lease with Supply Bank with terms involving the development of both the Supply Bank's portion of the project as well as the district facility at the Oakport property. I did click, so I'm gonna do that. So here's a rendering of what the project will look like when it's done. But I would want to draw your attention to the site plan on the bottom right-hand corner. So in blue is the 4.52 acres in terms of for the lease, for the supply bank portion of the project. And then in the magenta color is the 9.8 acres that the supply bank will be developed on behalf of the district as part of this lease term. And then in green is another 2.3 acres that would be used as common shared parking for both supply bank and the district. So to get a little bit into the details, here's a couple more renderings on the top of what the district's portion of the project will look like when it's done. And then on the very bottom is a rendering of a close-up of supply bank's portion of the job when it's done.
That's looking north, the bottom one?
The bottom one is looking north towards the bay, yes. So for the district's portion of the project, it will consist of a 63,000 square foot warehouse with 10,000 square feet of office space. It will come with a full service yard and material storage, as well as supporting parking and staging areas. And for the supply bank's portion of the project will consist of 60,000 square feet of warehouse right next to our warehouse, as well as 160,000 square feet of office building that will support local charities as well as nonprofits in the area serving our community. And then, of course, there will be parking supporting their side of the development. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a common area for 2.3 acres of shared parking space. So the City of Oakland is the CEQA lead agency for the project. And the city had prepared an EIR for the Coliseum area-specific plan back in 2015. And they did a project-specific CEQA addendum in June of 2023 for this development here. And then in July of 2023, the city's planning commission has voted to do two things. One is to affirm the city staff's environmental determination that the project is consistent with the existing zoning and general plan policy of the city. And they also affirmed that issuing a conditional use permit and other approval for the project would not result in any significant impacts. So the commission also voted to approve the conditional use permits and design review for the project. So because the project's being developed on district land under this lease being considered today by you, the district is acting as a CEQA responsible agency. And as a responsible agency, the district must consider the environmental effects identified in the CEQA documentation prior to approving this lease. So that means that the district must determine that the direct and indirect effects of the actions that we're taking today will be mitigated or avoided. And at this point, the district has concluded that all potential environmental impacts related to leasing the land and the construction of these facilities by supply bank under this lease will be mitigated to a level of less than significant, and no other environmental documentation and mitigations are required. So because of this conclusion, we are requesting the board for the following action. First, adopt the findings and a mitigation monitoring program, a reporting program for the lease of this 4.52 acres of district property to supply bank and the activities associated with the lease. And also, second, to authorize the lease for 4.52 acres of land within the Oakport property, and also any associated improvement in adjacent land. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer questions you have.
So just for orientation's sake, so right now, for instance, there's the amusement park in the last, sort of round before it hits 66.
Mm-hmm.
So this stops before, I can't tell, does this stop before that round of it? Just, since there's not so that's the Coliseum over there in the upper left, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is going south, and that's Oakport, around and about. So this takes up that whole area that's now vacant lot is that has the amusement park in it right now.
It will take up a majority of that area. So the entire development, it will consist 16 acres. So it will be
Okay.
pretty much the whole area.
Okay. Right, there's just that little nub that would not be affected, right? Not big enough to do anything else with, hopefully.
I think this will fill up the entire area, mostly.
Okay.
Is Supply Bank planning to use the entire office space in that building, or is there portions of that that we use or others?
Supply Bank is planning to lease these 160,000 square feet of space to local nonprofits as well as other charities and serving the community in that area. There will be amenities within the building that our, East Baywood can access, such as the future childcare once it's built, and also the wellness center once it's built.
But what they're going to build for us includes offices.
Correct.
So a warehouse,
Okay,
offices.
warehouse offices.
Yeah.
And we share the warehouse with them?
We don't share the warehouse, it's just that the warehouse is, our portion of the warehouse, if you follow with the little cursor here, this is our portion of the warehouse. This is their portion of the warehouse, but it's that one building right here.
Right.
But it looked like it was one structure, but it's divided by a common wall.
Okay. And is there any concern that there might be an oversupply of office space these days and an ability to fill that, or that's just not our problem, or?
Well, I will,
I see a lot of empty office buildings these days.
Well, especially that aren't near transit or,
Yeah.
yeah, I will let
unless there's a
Benito,
shuttle that's gonna
Oh,
run.
finish, I can
who is
see.
here in the audience, to address the occupancy issue for his building.
Hi, Benito Delgado Olson from supplybank.org. Good to see you all. Office vacancy is really at a historic high. However, our model is not to be a commercial landlord. It's to look at what the exact costs are to determine what rent should be so that the underwriter for the financing portion of the project goes through, and not to charge 1 cent more for rent than we have to, and to offer lease terms for the duration of the ground lease to creditworthy charities, so for up to 65 years. We're not looking to be a commercial landlord in any way. We're looking to build a community of like-minded individuals and organizations, and that's the exact way that we're marketing it to other organizations. We are sending NDAs to 2 prospective anchor tenants that will take up 1 to 2 floors each, depending on how they scope their needs. And I can say that in initial surveys we've done of the nonprofit community in the East Bay, San Francisco areas, that once individuals really understand what we're marketing to them, it changes their mind. There's no such thing as cheap real estate in the Bay Area, and that's not going to change. Eventually, the market will figure this out, whether it's housing or something else. So that's basically where we're at. And then on connectivity to mass transit, our pro forma does include, and I'm happy to say there's capital grants that can help fund it, BART shuttle that'll go back and forth between the Coliseum Station, which is a 1-mile loop, and that'll be free and open to the public as well so that they can access the Bay Trail.
Yeah, I would imagine that lease certainty for 65 years is probably pretty attractive for some NGOs that have that sort of permanence to them, so.
Thank you.
Even if 85% of their staff are now working from home.
So can I ask the board for a vote?
Okay, I'll move the motion. Second motion.
You get a second?
Yeah, second.
Moved and properly seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor indicate by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Got it.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Benito.
I actually bet you'll get a lot of tenants from down the street at that Oakport office building.
It's going to be fun.
I used to work there at that office building.
Okay, so we just have one more presentation. It's our water supply update, and Dave Briggs is here to provide the update.
Okay, thank you, Clifford. Good afternoon.
Lada wada.
Okay, so I'll be brief with this water supply update for the first meeting in March. And so first, just to see where we are with respect to water production. We're following very closely from last year, which is the green line. The red line is where we are to date. And we're anxiously waiting to see, we're really at a transition point right now in the month of March, because the first 9 or 10 days or so have been relatively cold and wet. You've probably seen the forecast in the next couple weeks. It's very dry. There's a high-pressure ridge building up right now. So we're not going to see a lot of precip. And the temperatures are going to rise. So you can see last year, as we crossed through April, and the green line demands really rose quickly because that's when the precip stopped and the temperatures rose. We might see that in the next week or so. So we'll see what the response is. But as far as the precipitation goes, we started March off pretty nicely, but it's petered out here. But locally, we're 76% of average. And so the East Bay index we use is 2 stations. One's at USL treatment plant, the other is at Lafayette Reservoir. But this is pretty indicative of most of the stations in the East Bay that are running below average. As much as it may seem that we're above average, we're still trailing a little bit below average here locally. And I wanted to make a remark earlier that this is really, if there's one thing, a hallmark of this year, I think it's how unremarkable this year is. The rain is coming in slowly. There hasn't been a lot of big eventful storms, notwithstanding Southern California. So the storms have been pretty tame. The rainfall has been really metered out very slowly, so it's been relatively easy for us operationally. Upcountry, things are better. We had a great February, pretty good March so far, 96% of average. So this is a 4-station index over a variety of elevations in the McElmy watershed. The snowpack, which is measured here at this particular station, is upper elevation, about 8,000 feet. So this is really kind of an anomaly in the watershed. This is in great shape, where we're way above average with respect to depth and water content here, but this is just one location. Watershed-wise, it's still trailing slightly below average, but the snowpack at the upper elevations is fantastic. This slide is a bit garish, I know, with the color scheme, but really wanted to show you how impactful that storm was, not last weekend, but the weekend before. It essentially shut Tahoe down. You can see if some of these stations look familiar to you, Sugar Bowl, Soda Springs. These are right on the Interstate 80 corridor where they got 10 feet of snow over that weekend. Just a very, very impactful storm that essentially shut everything down. We fared a little less bountiful in our watershed, where we picked up a little over 4 feet of snow just in that weekend. Yeah, when I first saw this, I thought this was the wildfire map or something, just based on the color scheme. But yeah, so the deep purples are the deep snow, and the more fiery colors are less intense snowfall. So again, up and down the Sierras, looking good with the snowpack water content. Everything is above average at this point, except for the Southern Sierra. And last slide I have for you. So here we are with our overall storage, 660,000 acre feet. We are making flood control releases right now. But in the second half of March, with the snowpack that we have right now, which is, again, the Caples location is above average, but the entire watershed is pretty normal, all in all. So we are going to come out of our flood control reservation requirements here on March 15th. So we're going to start building the storage up beginning in a few days here as we come out of, as we get released from that flood control requirement. But under the variety of hydrologies that we have forecasted, so with so little left in the water year, we only have essentially a couple months left in the water year. A lot of these hydrologies will tend to coalesce on each other, whether it's wet or dry, because there's just not that much hydrology left for the entire year. But across this range of hydrologies, we're looking at filling the storage, which is a great sign. So we should end the year full, absent something very extraordinary happening. And that's what I have for you.
Thank you, Dave. And then in your packets, the monthly report, and at your places is the Speaker's Bureau. And that's all my reports.
Yes, so I will, I will refer back to the general manager. If there's no further questions on the water supply update, I will refer back to the general manager to go over the monthly report.
If you have any questions about the monthly report, it's in your packet, and then again, at your place is the speaker's bureau.
Okay.
So I think we're on to board member
And
comments.
the minutes from the February 27th Finance Administration Committee meeting were included in your agenda materials. We'll now receive an update from this morning's Planning and Legislative Human Resources Committee meetings. Director Young.
Okay, for Planning Committee, we had a packed agenda. Talked about the impact of climate change on our dams and learned that the maximum possible flood event is ginormous, but very unlikely. We had the Water Quality Program annual update, which included, our continuing consistent track record of meeting standards and goals, as well as updates on our remediation or prevention of lead, and the work that's going on with PFAS, which is upcoming still. We had actually started off the meeting with the great report from our McCollum fishery update, which everybody knows we had a 80-year record, wonderful year. The thing that I took away from it that was really most encouraging was that we had, we have a hatchery, so the fish come up and they spawn and we get their eggs, but we had 5,000 nesting sites, in the watershed below Comanche, which is awesome. It means that our habitat recovery efforts are really paying off. We also had a lot of American River visitors to our watershed, thanks to a combination of pulse flows and Delta Cross Channel closures. We had our regulatory compliance report where we heard about a few problems that we've been dealing with, but overall a pretty good year as they go. And then finally, an update on Los Vaqueros, which includes where we are still trying to figure out whether we're in it or not, based on a number of agreements that are and discussions that are going on, and ultimately what the cost will be, and if it's worth it to us. So that was planning.
Ready? Yes, in terms of ledge HR this morning, we only had one item on the agenda, with the report coming from Kathy, and that was to look at the
PFAS.
I always have trouble with that. Anyway, it was an excellent presentation that was made in an attempt to plan ahead, particularly noting how the governor had vetoed before that item, and how this hopes to bring it to fruition well before the now set 2030 deadline. And so that an item appeared on our agenda. We've already talked about it later today when she made that presentation. I think the other things were given for general comments, some of the federal legislation and some of the state legislation that's proposed, still being worked on. Basically, that's the report from this morning. I think now, you have in, you have received, let me look at the end of this here. I jump from one to the other. I think other items, please submit items for consideration to the general manager if you have any. And thank you for, if you've already submitted written comments. And do any of you have comments beyond that you want to make now before adjournment? None? Then we are adjourned.